In the heart of the Cold War era, when the world was divided into spheres of influence between the superpowers of the East and the West, few places became as entangled in this global struggle as the nations of southern Africa. Mozambique, a vast territory stretching along the Indian Ocean coastline, with its deep water ports at Maputo and Beira, its long borders shared with Rhodesia, South Africa, and other neighbors, held immense strategic value. Control over Mozambique meant influence over vital trade routes, access to the sea for landlocked countries, and a front-line position in the ideological battle between communism and capitalism. As newly independent African states emerged from colonial rule, Mozambique's position made it a prized asset and a potential flashpoint for both the Soviet Union and the United States. The story of Mozambique's civil war is not merely one of internal division, but of how distant powers, pursuing their own agendas thousands of miles away, poured fuel onto local grievances, turning a young nation into a battlefield where millions would suffer. This conflict, raging from 1977 to 1992, claimed the lives of nearly 1 million people, displaced millions more, and left scars that linger to this day. It reshaped the map of southern Africa, contributing to the fall of white minority rule in neighboring countries, while nearly destroying Mozambique itself in the process. What began as a struggle for liberation from centuries of Portuguese colonialism descended into a brutal proxy war, where foreign arms, advisors, and ideologies amplified the violence beyond imagination. Imagine a land of stunning natural beauty, rolling savannas, lush river valleys, and a coastline kissed by the warm waters of the Indian Ocean transformed into a landscape of fear and destruction. Villages burned to the ground, families torn apart, children forced into uniforms far too heavy for their young shoulders. This was the reality for the people of Mozambique during those 15 harrowing years. A war that devastated an entire generation, erased infrastructure built over decades, and sowed seeds of trauma that would echo through families and communities long after the guns fell silent. Yet, amid the darkness, there were moments of resilience, of hope, and ultimately, of a hard-won peace that offered a chance for rebirth. This is the story of how Mozambique, caught in the crosscurrents of global power, paid an unimaginable price, and how it began to heal. Colonial rule and the road to independence for nearly 5 centuries. Mozambique existed under the shadow of Portuguese colonial domination, a rule that began with the arrival of explorers like Vasco da Gama in the late 15th century, and evolved into a system of profound exploitation. Portugal viewed its African territories not as colonies to be developed for the benefit of their inhabitants, but as extensions of the mother country, sources of raw materials and labor to fuel the empire's economy. By the early 20th century, large tracts of land were leased to private companies, often backed by British or other foreign capital, which operated with near-autonomous authority. These chartered companies, such as the Mozambique Company and the Niassa Company, imposed harsh regimes of forced labor, compelling indigenous Mozambicans to work on plantations producing cotton, sugar, and other cash crops destined for export. The system known as chibolo, or forced labor, became a cornerstone of colonial policy. African men were rounded up, often at gunpoint, and sent to toil on roads, railways, or distant farms for months or years, receiving little or no pay. Taxes had to be paid in cash, forcing many into this exploitative cycle simply to meet colonial demands. Women and children were not spared the indirect burdens. Families were disrupted as breadwinners were taken away, leaving villages to struggle for survival. Resistance was met with brutality, whippings, imprisonment, or worse. In the southern regions, labor was also funneled to the mines of neighboring South Africa, enriching foreign interests while impoverishing Mozambican communities. As the 20th century progressed, discontent grew among the educated elite and rural populations alike. Small nationalist groups began to form in the 1940s and 1950s, inspired by broader African movements for self-determination. Exiled Mozambicans in neighboring countries organized, and in 1962, several of these groups merged in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, to create the Mozambique Liberation Front, or FRELIMO, under the leadership of Eduardo Mondlane, a scholar and diplomat who had studied in the United States. FRELIMO's goal was clear: to end Portuguese rule through armed struggle if necessary. The War of Independence began in earnest in September 1964, when FRELIMO guerrillas launched attacks in the northern provinces, trained in Algeria and supported with arms from the Soviet Union and China. The fighters employed hit-and-run tactics, establishing liberated zones where they built schools and clinics to win local support. Portugal responded with overwhelming force, deploying tens of thousands of troops, defoliants, and fortified villages in a counterinsurgency campaign that mirrored efforts in Angola and Guinea-Bissau. The conflict dragged on for a decade, costing thousands of lives on both sides and straining Portugal's resources. The turning point came not on the battlefield, but in Lisbon. In April 1974, a military coup known as the Carnation Revolution overthrew the long-standing authoritarian regime. Led by young officers weary of endless colonial wars, the new government moved swiftly to grant independence to its African territories. In Mozambique, negotiations led to a transitional government dominated by FRELIMO, and on June 25, 1975, the nation officially became independent. With Samora Machel as its first president, joy filled the streets of Maputo as the Portuguese flag was lowered and the new Mozambican banner raised. But the celebrations masked deep challenges. The abrupt departure of nearly all Portuguese settlers, over 300,000 in a matter of months, created a massive political and economic vacuum. Skilled administrators, doctors, engineers, and teachers vanished overnight, leaving behind abandoned farms, factories, and offices. FRELIMO inherited a country ravaged by war, with minimal infrastructure outside the cities and a population eager for change, but divided by regional, ethnic, and ideological differences. As the new government sought to build a socialist state, enforcing collective farming and nationalizing industries, tensions simmered beneath the surface, setting the stage for the catastrophe to come. Birth of a civil war independence brought hope, but it also unleashed forces that would soon plunge Mozambique into deeper chaos. FRELIMO's vision was ambitious, a Marxist-Leninist state committed to rapid modernization, education for all, and equality. At its third Congress in 1977, the movement formally declared itself a vanguard party, implementing policies like villagization, moving rural populations into communal villages to facilitate services and collective agriculture. While these reforms aimed at progress, they often alienated traditional leaders and peasants who resented the disruption of ancestral ways. Ideological divisions within the country widened. Some Mozambicans, particularly in the central and southern regions, viewed FRELIMO's northern-dominated leadership with suspicion, seeing it as imposing alien structures. Dissidents fled or were imprisoned, creating a pool of potential recruits for opposition. It was in this environment that the Mozambican National Resistance, or RENAMO, emerged. RENAMO's origins trace back to Rhodesia's intelligence services in the mid-1970s. Facing its own guerrilla war against ZANLA fighters based in Mozambique, the white minority regime in Salisbury sought to retaliate by destabilizing its neighbor. Rhodesian agents recruited disaffected Mozambicans, including former Portuguese commandos and FRELIMO defectors like André Motsonguesa, who had been jailed for dissent. Initially, a small group focused on sabotage and intelligence. RENAMO grew under Rhodesian training and support, launching raids from bases across the border. Early clashes were sporadic but brutal. RENAMO targeted government outposts, roads, and villages perceived as loyal to FRELIMO, aiming to erode rural security. As Rhodesian forces conducted cross-border operations, bombing camps and occupying towns like Mapai, the insurgency gained momentum. When Motsonguesa was killed in 1979, Afonso de la Cama took command, proving a charismatic and ruthless leader. Regional instability amplified the conflict. After Zimbabwe's independence in 1980, South Africa's apartheid regime inherited the role of RENAMO's primary backer. Pretoria viewed a Marxist Mozambique as a threat, hosting ANC exiles and enforcing sanctions against the old Rhodesia. Supporting RENAMO became part of a broader destabilization strategy, supplying arms, training, and safe havens guerrilla warfare spread rapidly. RENAMO forces, operating in small, mobile units, ambushed convoys, mined roads, and attacked economic targets. Rural areas collapsed into insecurity. Farmers abandoned fields, schools closed, and health posts were destroyed. By the early 1980s, the insurgency controlled vast swaths of the countryside, while FRELIMO held the cities. What began as external meddling had evolved into a full-scale civil war, drawing in neighbors and superpowers alike. Cold War proxy battlefield as the 1980s dawned. Mozambique had become a quintessential Cold War proxy battlefield, where the ideological contest between East and West was fought through African lives and land. FRELIMO's alignment with the Soviet bloc invited massive assistance, arms, advisors, and economic aid flowed from Moscow, Havana, and East Berlin. Cuban troops, battle-hardened from Angola, arrived to train Mozambican forces and guard vital infrastructure. Soviet pilots flew missions. East German instructors built security apparatus. And North Korean specialists formed elite counterinsurgency units. On the other side, RENAMO received backing from conservative Western elements, channeled through South Africa and private networks in the United States and Europe. Though official U.S. policy initially resisted direct involvement, conservative lobbies pushed for support, seeing RENAMO as a bulwark against communism. South Africa's military provided the bulk, weapons, logistics, and even air support for operations. Mozambique became a chessboard for global politics, where local grievances were subsumed under superpower strategies. FRELIMO's support for liberation movements in Zimbabwe and South Africa provoked retaliation. While RENAMO's atrocities were tolerated as necessary to weaken a socialist state, the war militarized everyday life. Conscription swelled armies, villages became fortified, and propaganda filled the airwaves. Escalation brought devastation. RENAMO's tactics targeted civilians to undermine FRELIMO's legitimacy, destroying development projects and creating no-go zones. Government forces responded with heavy-handed operations, relocating populations and bombing suspected rebel areas. Foreign advisors embedded with both sides intensified the fighting, introducing advanced weaponry and tactics. By mid-decade, the conflict had internationalized further. Zimbabwe deployed troops to protect its trade corridors through Mozambique, suffering heavy losses from RENAMO ambushes. Tanzania and Malawi contributed forces to safeguard economic interests. The war's brutality shocked the world, yet Cold War logic sustained it, with neither side willing to concede until external supports wavered. The human cost, true tragedy of Mozambique's civil war lay not in the maneuvers of armies or the calculations of distant powers, but in the profound suffering inflicted upon ordinary people. Over 15 years, the conflict exacted a toll that defies easy comprehension: nearly 1 million dead, many from starvation and disease exacerbated by disrupted agriculture. Millions displaced within the country or fleeing as refugees to neighboring states. Entire regions reduced to wastelands strewn with landmines. Villages bore the brunt of the violence. RENAMO forces, in particular, targeted rural communities, burning homes, looting livestock, and killing those suspected of supporting FRELIMO. Massacres became horrifyingly common. Civilians lined up and executed, bodies left as warnings. Survivors recounted nights of terror, hiding in the bush as flames consumed their livelihoods. Government troops, too, committed abuses in counter-operations, shelling areas indiscriminately or forcing relocations that led to hardship. One of the war's darkest legacies was the recruitment of child soldiers. Both sides abducted boys and sometimes girls as young as 10, forcing them into combat or labor. These children, torn from families, witnessed and perpetrated unspeakable acts. Their innocence shattered. Many carried weapons heavier than themselves, marching through minefields or launching attacks on villages. Famine stalked the land. Deliberate strategies to deny food to the enemy destroyed harvests and blocked aid. By the mid-1980s, drought compounded the crisis, leading to widespread starvation. Images of emaciated children and desperate mothers seeking relief shocked the international community. Yet the war's logic prioritized military gains over humanitarian needs. Displacement created rivers of refugees. Over 5 million people fled homes, crowding into camps in Malawi, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, or swelling urban slums in Mozambique. Families separated, cultures disrupted, health crises, rampant malaria, cholera, and malnutrition claimed countless lives. The psychological trauma ran deep. Generations grew up knowing only war, witnessing violence that left indelible marks. Survivors spoke of lost childhoods, shattered trust, and enduring fear. Women suffered particularly, abducted for forced labor or sexual violence, bearing children of rape, struggling alone to rebuild. This human costra, unrelenting, and immense, stands as the war's most damning indictment. A reminder of how proxy conflicts exact their heaviest price from the innocent. Peace, negotiation, and aftermath. By the late 1980s, exhaustion gripped Mozambique. Neither side could achieve decisive victory. The economy lay in ruins, famine persisted, and international shifts eroded external support. The Soviet Union's reforms under Gorbachev reduced aid to allies, while South Africa's apartheid regime faced mounting pressure, culminating in reforms that curtailed regional adventures. War weariness opened doors to dialogue. Informal contacts, facilitated by churches and neighboring leaders, led to direct talks in Rome, mediated by the community of Sant'Egidio and supported by Italy, the United Nations, and others. After 12 rounds of arduous negotiations, President Joaquim Chissano, who had succeeded Samora Machel, After his tragic death in a 1986 plane crash, and RENAMO leader Afonso de la Cama signed the General Peace Accords on October 4, 1992. The accords provided for ceasefire, demobilization of forces, and multi-party elections. A United Nations peacekeeping operation, UNUMOZ, oversaw implementation, monitoring assembly points where tens of thousands of combatants laid down arms. Former enemies integrated into a new national army, while others reintegrated into civilian life with assistance. Elections in 1994 marked a historic transition. FRELIMO won, but RENAMO emerged as a legitimate opposition, contesting power peacefully. Mozambique embarked on reconstruction, clearing millions of landmines, rebuilding infrastructure, and repatriating refugees. Yet the aftermath revealed enduring challenges. Poverty persisted, inequality grew with market reforms, and political tensions occasionally flared. The war's legacy trauma, orphaned children, disabled veterans shaped society. Landmines continued to maim long after peace. Today, Mozambique grapples with these shadows while pursuing development. The conflict taught harsh lessons about Cold War proxy wars in Africa, how foreign interference prolongs suffering, exploits divisions, and undermines fragile post-colonial states. It highlighted the cost of ideological battles fought on distant soil, where superpowers advanced agendas at the expense of human lives. And it underscored the fragility of new nations, where unity forged in liberation struggles can fracture under pressure. In reflecting on Mozambique's ordeal, we confront uncomfortable truths about global power and its human consequences. Peace, hard-won and imperfect, offers hope, but only if the lessons of devastation are heeded, ensuring that such wars remain consigned to history.